Hey, Sculpture A class. I'm going to talk to you about your first project, and this will be our first lecture about a project. Hopefully, you've actually already watched the video lecture about sculpture and kind of given you an overview about 3D work. That could be found in here, Introduction to Sculpture, What is Sculpture? We're going to be talking about this project right here, egg drop functionality. And the information about the project is in here, the objective and materials they could possibly use and the requirements. So you want to look at that after you watch this. I want to point out right now that it has to be aesthetically appealing and that you need to do these things in your drawing: measurements, material list, and in progress posts. You can use a lot of different materials for this, and there'll be some requirements that we'll talk about with it. One of them is a raw egg must have easy access to your sculpture device, so that's important. And you have to turn in the planning sketches, and then you do 3 images to show me. Okay? So that's just to let you know right off the bat some important things off this, but you want to read the whole thing. So what is an egg drop, and how and why are we doing it, and how are we doing it? Well, it's a classic sort of physics class assignment, and I thought it'd be interesting for art because a lot of times people think art has no function. It's just purely about beauty and aesthetics, and it is, but I think that even aesthetics have a function, and there's a lot of art in the history of art, that is actually functional. And so I think I wanted to try to pull out this idea about design being functional, and that the form would have to follow the function in design. That's a classic quote: form follows function. What does that mean? Well, it means that the way you build it and how you build it should match its function. So even if it's about communicating something beautiful, then you need to do it in a form that works for that, right? But we're doing something that's meant to be actually functional. So in physics class, you would do to protect an egg during free fall motion, and they would determine how to spread out the force over the time before the impact, to redirect the impact of the force so that it doesn't hit the ground directly. And there's different ways and principles you would do that: air resistance, which is drag; impulse, which changes the momentum; elasticity, which is the ability to return to its original shape, so compression and stretch; and buoyancy is the displacement. So these are kind of basic ideas, like a parachute, rubber bands, something around it, and maybe a way to soften it. Yours is going to be aesthetic and functional. So aesthetic means concern with the beauty or the appreciation of beauty, and function is how it works. It actually has to work. The quality of being suited to serve a purpose well. So that's functionality. Beauty, concern with beauty or the appreciation of it. Okay? So you're going to be mixing these two together. There's lots of ways people do this. This shows you that something like a fin in the air, something where it rests inside of it, takes the force. This is to soften it, and elasticity. But some of them aren't necessarily as beautiful as others, so you're going to have to think about the aesthetic that you want to incorporate and how you incorporate it into this idea. If you're feeling puzzled, don't worry, we'll keep trying to unpack this for you in the slideshow. It can be any scale, but it needs to include an egg in the chamber. So that's the size of an egg, roughly. They come in various sizes: jumbo, extra large. And it needs to think about that as part of it. When you need to think about that as part of it. So this is just a pun on Magritte painting an apple. So it's going to be in relationship to the egg, what you're making. So you have to have part of it at least where the egg can go in and out of it. It has a chamber where it's located. So that's going to be one of your design requirements that you're going to want to write down. And then you're going to have to think about, what kind of method do you want to use, or a combination of them? Maybe air resistance. So that gives you different ways of parachutes, sails, things like that. It can give you a lot of aesthetic possibility as well. Change of momentum can be a way to do it. It's interesting. This is kind of a little bit boring aesthetic, but it could become more interesting doing it that way. You have like elasticity that I already showed you to bounce and stop it. That's another way. And you could get really interesting with this aesthetic, or buoyancy, things that will stop it from impacting it soft. What do I mean though in this way of aesthetic? I mean, I did this little slideshow here to kind of talk to you about aesthetic doesn't have to necessarily mean beauty in the way of one particular person's opinion of it, right? I did roses. I Googled roses with different types of aesthetics, right? You have like all different roses here with very different types of aesthetics, and they're all considered to be beautiful or awesome or lovely by different people. And some people would love this and hate this, and some people would love this and hate all the rest, you know. So you have like gothic aesthetic, steampunk aesthetic, you know, classic Victorian aesthetic. This is like Muku Luku, that's the wrong name of the artist. Art Deco and Art Nouveau, and then you have something like an anti-aesthetic. This is you know, there's a lot of variety, right? And so I want you to think about kind of the theme or aesthetic you're interested in with this. And I think when you do this, it's best if you actually maybe think about what it is you're building. You're building some type of machine, and the type of system you pick to stop the egg from getting ruined when it falls maybe will inform your aesthetic a little bit. What do I mean by that? Well, parachutes have a sort of aesthetic to them, and you have possibilities of how you make it aesthetic with the cloth or paper, right? Which is very different from something that has a lot of bands. Okay, so the type of materials you're using should be part of, and the thought about what type of materials you need to use to be able to make it work, functional, would be part of your aesthetic. So in contemporary art, there's a long and even old art, long ago, ancient art. There's all kinds of art that's aesthetic, way back even to ancient times with spear throwers that have carvings of bison on them and things, right? So functionality in art isn't really new, but I want to show you some contemporary things and things from pretty recent art history. This is a piece by Theo Jansen. These all actually move. There's a link inside the module that I have. I'll show you later in this slideshow about it. But these are really interesting. They actually move on the beach in the wind, make some moves, strand beasts. So what's their functionality? Well, they move. Is it necessarily a functionality like an egg drop to stop an egg, or a spear throwing thing, or a cane? No, it's more like a function of his own design, like to make these things that move across the beach. But they're very beautiful and interesting and kind of machine-like, but also very mythical feeling, right? So he could have made something that sort of walks on feet that isn't quite so insect-like or something mythological feeling. This is an interesting piece about functionality. Michael Landy's breakdown. He's a young British artist, part of the YBAs, and he destroyed his entire amount of possessions. He put everything, he cataloged all of the things he owned and then put them through this whole process, including his car. Everything got broken down and then turned into like a mulch his whole life, to talk about spectacle, ownership, and a whole bunch of other type of things. And it's a functional, performative piece of art that actually happened, and actually functions happened to his stuff, and it became this sort of mulch at the end of it all to talk about ownership and value. It's very interesting. One of the things that got destroyed, there's articles about it, was like a pretty decently famous work of art that was probably worth a lot, and his car. So that's a very, 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 very big project to engage in, and probably costs a lot of money to set up all this equipment to be able to destroy all this stuff too. From longer ago, there's an interesting guy. He has a bunch of sort of machines that break themselves and do all sorts of contraption type of things. And in his work, you can see there's a very particular sort of aesthetic the machine age, but kind of a wiry, whimsical, like almost steampunk type of thing, way before steampunk existed. Um, so you want to think about that. He's got Institute Zhongtungwei to him, and you can actually look it up. And I post some videos on in the module about how these things work. Pretty interesting. Marcel Duchamp. Marcel Duchamp is one of the fathers of conceptual art way back in the day. The Fountain's a famous piece people know about. This is another one of his that actually moves and has an aesthetic to it. So it has a function, aesthetic function, but also moves and does something like a contraption. And then Alexander Calder, you've probably heard of him before, the inventor of the mobile. These are moving pieces of art, sculpture. He also did his wire circus, which we'll talk about was a later project, but very much interested in movement, transformation, and functionality in his work, but also still aesthetic. These are serving the purpose of being aesthetic. That's their main function, but they're also supposed to move and constantly change. And so I think they're in flux, they're responsive to air, the way they balance. He's thought about a lot of things that would be similar in a way to you with your egg drop. I like this artist a lot. He's not so well known. He's Brazilian. His name's Ilio Oiticica. These are called perengolés. They're sculptural, fabric-based, wearable objects that are sculptures that when they're hanging, but also when they're being used, and they're made to be danced in. He's very much interested in dance and movement of the body, Brazilian samba and things like that, and so he made work around that. A whole series of these perengolés. He made a lot of other sculptural work, and he's a really interesting artist who started getting some more recognition recently. Like he's been around he's been around a long time, known about, but there were some shows in New York of his work fairly recently with Legia Clark. So I have links posted on a page titled Kinetic and Functional Sculpture. It's in the module for you to watch them. You can see how these things work. And I think you'll really enjoy checking those out. None of them are very long, just long enough to give you the idea of them, which is perfect. So you're sitting there wondering, well, okay, how do I start this project? It's all good. I know what I need to do now, right? Yes, you know what you need to do, which is create an egg drop. Okay, and you know that it has to be able to fit an egg and have a container inside of it. You have different ways you can successfully make it so the egg doesn't break, and you have some aesthetic choices to make about the type of material you're going to use. But where do you start with? Well, you have to use a sort of design process to take an idea through to finished work. So you've probably maybe seen this slide before I took 2D design with me, but it's the idea of research. You have to think about quick sketches. I've given you a creative brief to make an egg drop, and it has to have a place for the egg and stop it from breaking when it hits the ground. Now you have to go through a kind of process to think about how it will look and how it would work. So you got to do some brainstorming and think about what materials would work for this that you have available to you around, and what do they look like? Are they the type of materials that you're interested in using? Can you change and adapt them to look a bit differently? Okay, so that's going to be a bit of looking around, seeing what you have, plus also maybe just thinking about which way you're most interested in stopping the egg from breaking. You're going to want to do some quick type of what we call thumbnail sketches to get yourself thinking about your ideas, little quick ones, so that you think with your pen or pencil on the paper. Don't just sit there and think in your head. Visualize it. You need to visualize it. It'll help you to do some rough gestural drawings where you go quick and kind of try to define the form and go around it on the surface of the form just by doing some rough drafts. So you would take your best ideas, and then look at your materials you found and start to try to do some various designs this way. Once you get something you might be somewhat happy with as a rough draft, I really recommend to you to refine them and try to visualize things in depth. These are very flat sort of drawings at first, right? Quick little drawings, and then we're going here to refine sketches, not flat anymore for sculpture. The purpose of the drawing is not to create a drawing in and of itself, albeit if you like the drawing, that's awesome, I'm glad, but to give you sort of drawings that are useful as a plan or a way of working. And so I think this is called isometric perspective, but you could just think of it as a crating type of technique too, where you're taking a crate sort of that you made and you're filling it full to see what this thing looks like. Think about the outside of it and the internal structure a bit when you do this. I could just draw the house outside, but I might want to draw some of the things inside of it, like what's going to brace it, how it's going to be connected together. It's really about giving yourself, see the difference between this is how it looks on the outside versus the structure inside. But both of them are in this 3/4 isometric view where you can kind of get clarity about what you're trying to build. You really want probably to have a few views of it. They're plans, so they don't have to be perfect. They do not need to be perfect. Don't get hung up on that. They need to be useful to build from. Okay? So you might want a top view, a front view, and a 3/4 view, or just the inside and the outside to give you some ideas about what you're really trying to accomplish. Okay? So once you have your drawings, you're going to submit them so we can have a look at them together as a class and for me to give you feedback about the aesthetic, like the designs that you've made aesthetically, and also the functionality. So we're going to want to look at those so we can say, okay, what kind of system are you using to do this? Okay, does it seem like it would work? That's good. And then does it have an aesthetic that matches? So does it look like it's going to be visually compelling as well as functioning? So that's kind of what we're going for there. That hopefully makes sense to you. I think don't be overwhelmed. Just start the process. You have a little research to do maybe. I gave you a lot of the information there. Watch this. The best thing now is to start idea generation through the brainstorming and quick sketches and seeing what type of materials you have. Part of this process would be, okay, what do I have around me? And then go into some gestural draft drawings. They don't have to be executed like you would for a drawing class where everything is perfectly done, but they're for a usefulness to be a plan to build from. But you want to work them out so that your design is clear, so that when you're going to build, you won't be able to do it perfectly like them probably. It takes a lot of practice to be able to perfectly execute a drawing in 3D. It's so that you have a general good idea, a strong idea to work off of, so that when you're making decisions, you can reference this. It's not just a random thing. When you go to build, you're going to want to keep these in front of you like plans, okay? So this is very important. I'm going to pull this up one more time now that we're back to the end of it and say your design needs to have the measurements, okay? This is important. Why is it important? Because I want you to think about ahead of time what kind of size you need and what you're going to need, what you have that is that size. Okay, so when you do your drawing with the measurements, you're going to want to have them listed on here. This has it says 3 centimeters, for example. Okay, that's important. It's not just random to say, oh, well, he's making me do the measurements. No, it's so that you have a good idea when you're building it. A material list. What materials do you think will work for you? Toothpicks, paper clips, straws, string, cotton balls, pipe cleaners, rubber bands, paper plates, newspaper, cardboard, balloons, paint. You could do pieces of egg carton. It doesn't have to be really expensive materials. It's just materials that you have around you. Part of this is about you seeing how you can transform regular, quotidian, regular materials that you could find into something that's interesting and aesthetic. So you'd be using scissors, tape, glue, X-Acto knives, paint brushes, and paint to make this look the way you want. And as you do it, you'll see that it doesn't take necessarily super complicated materials to make really amazing things. I know people who I went to school with in graduate school and undergrad who use cardboard to make some of the most amazing sculptures just out of cardboard and resin or some kind of glue to hold them in place. That's it. So you can do a lot with some really basic materials if you think about how they work and what they can do. So that's your drawing. You want to really make sure you kind of work some stuff out there. And then once you do, you're going to want to try out building some stuff, right? You're going to want to try using some of these materials with and build something. Just remember the requirements. You have to have an egg, a place to put the egg. That's really important. It has to be able to go in there and stay in there. Okay, you're going to want to think about the surface quality, the refinement, and completion of the work. This is not meant to look like you did it in 20 minutes with some hot glue everywhere and it looks like a bunch of junk put together. It needs to be well designed and considered. It's a piece of art and functional, okay? So this early work is for me to see how you work with material and to help you realize about craftsmanship and things. But it's important for you to have a high level of craftsmanship because that's how things will actually stay together and function. But also for your own sake as creators and creative people, you want to actually take it seriously to be able to work with material and learn how material works, because a lot of things you do in the creative careers and fields and things take model making as a step in them, and this would be similar to that. So we're going to be doing other projects, one other project with this sort of model but different material. So this is a really good, useful way to start the course, to use things that maybe you're pretty familiar with, but to start to think about them in this context. Okay? If you have questions, please feel free to post in the question and answer cafe. And make sure you watch those videos. They're pretty interesting videos about seeing those people's work in action. You'll probably like them quite a bit. Maybe you'll be inspired and Google a few of them and see more of the work they do. All right? Take care. Hope you're staying well out there. And social distancing, it's kind of challenging these days because we've all been cooped up in our house for so long. Take care.